Imagine a country so large that nearly one out of every four people on Earth would live within its borders. A country with nuclear weapons, one of the world's fastest growing economies, thousands of kilometers of coastline, and enough manpower to reshape the global balance of power. It wouldn't just be another major nation. It could become one of the most powerful countries in modern history, but here's the incredible part. This country almost existed. Less than a century ago, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh were all part of the same political entity, a land known as British India. Then, in 1947, everything changed. One decision split this giant into three separate nations, a decision that still shapes Asia today. But what if history had taken a different path? What if British India had never been divided? Would it have become the world's next superpower? Or would it have collapsed under its own weight? To answer that question, we first need to understand what British India actually was. For almost 200 years, Britain ruled large parts of the Indian subcontinent. It wasn't just today's India. It also included most of present-day Pakistan and Bangladesh, creating one of the largest and most valuable colonies the British Empire had ever controlled. At its peak, more than 400 million people lived there, roughly 1 in every 5 people on Earth at the time. The region supplied Britain with cotton, tea, spices, coal, and countless other resources. Major cities such as Bombay, Calcutta, and Karachi became vital trading hubs, connecting Europe with the rest of Asia. But by the end of World War II, Britain's empire was running out of time. The war had devastated the British economy, and independence movements across the world were growing stronger. Keeping control over such a vast territory had become impossible. Britain decided to leave. However, there was one problem. What should happen next? The subcontinent was incredibly diverse. Hundreds of languages, dozens of ethnic groups, and two major religious communities, Hindus and Muslims, whose political leaders increasingly disagreed about the future of an independent nation. Some believed a single united country could work. Others feared that religious minorities would never feel safe under a government dominated by the other side. As negotiations continued, tensions rose. Violence spread across several regions. Eventually, Britain chose the fastest solution: partition. In August 1947, British India disappeared almost overnight. India became independent. Pakistan was created as a separate country. And in 1971, East Pakistan fought for independence and became today's Bangladesh. One country had become three. Millions of people suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of a newly drawn border. Families fled their homes. Communities that had lived together for generations were separated. It became one of the largest migrations in human history. And with that single decision, the map of South Asia was changed forever. But what if none of this had happened? What if British India had remained one country? What would that nation look like today? Now, let's imagine that none of those borders were ever drawn. Instead of three separate countries, South Asia remained united under one government. Today, that nation would be home to almost 1.9 billion people. To put that into perspective, that's nearly 1 out of every 4 people on Earth. No other country would even come close. But population alone doesn't make a superpower. So let's look at what this country would actually have. First, its economy. India is already one of the world's largest economies and continues to grow at an impressive pace. It's a global leader in software, pharmaceuticals, space technology, and digital services. Now add Pakistan. Pakistan brings more than 250 million people, a large manufacturing sector, major agricultural production, and one of the most strategically important coastlines in Asia. Then there's Bangladesh. For decades, Bangladesh has quietly become one of the world's manufacturing success stories. Its textile industry exports clothing to almost every major brand on the planet, while its economy has grown rapidly over the last 2 decades. Together, these three economies would create an economic giant, unlike anything the world has ever seen. A massive consumer market, hundreds of millions of workers, some of the busiest ports in the Indian Ocean, world-class technology companies, one of the largest agricultural sectors on Earth, and enormous natural resources. Few countries could match that combination. Geography would make this nation even more powerful. It would stretch from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal, controlling thousands of kilometers of coastline. Nearly every major shipping route between Europe and East Asia passes close to these waters. That means a united British India wouldn't just participate in global trade, it would sit directly at the center of it. Its ports could become some of the busiest on the planet. Its influence over regional commerce would grow enormously, and investors from around the world would likely see it as one of the most important markets of the 21st century. But perhaps the country's greatest advantage wouldn't be its land or its resources. It would be its people. Imagine nearly 2 billion citizens, millions of engineers, millions of entrepreneurs, millions of scientists, millions of students entering the workforce every year. If even a small percentage of them created successful businesses or technological breakthroughs, the impact on the global economy could be extraordinary. Some economists believe that demographic size can become one of a country's greatest strengths if it creates enough jobs, invests in education, and maintains political stability. And that's the key phrase, political stability. Because everything we've talked about so far assumes that this enormous country actually functions as one nation. But history suggests that keeping it together would have been far more difficult than growing its economy. In fact, the greatest threat to this superpower might never have come from China or the United States. It might have come from within. And that's where this alternate history becomes truly fascinating, because building a superpower is one thing. Keeping it together is something else entirely. Even before partition, British India wasn't a unified nation in the way many people imagine. It was home to hundreds of ethnic groups, dozens of major languages, and countless regional identities. People from Punjab, Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Kashmir, or Sindh often had very different cultures, traditions, and political priorities. Religion added another layer of complexity. Today, India has a Hindu majority, while Pakistan and Bangladesh are predominantly Muslim. Those differences didn't suddenly appear in 1947. They had been growing for decades. In our alternate timeline, a united government would have needed to convince nearly 2 billion people that they all belonged to the same nation. That would have been one of the greatest political challenges in modern history. A single mistake, a controversial election, or an economic crisis could have pushed the country toward instability. History gives us plenty of examples. Large, diverse countries can thrive, but they can also struggle when different regions feel ignored or underrepresented. If a united British India wanted to succeed, it would need exceptionally strong institutions, fair political representation, and a government capable of balancing the interests of hundreds of millions of people. And then there's the military. Today, India and Pakistan each possess nuclear weapons. In this alternate world, it's possible those programs would have merged into one, but it's just as possible a united government would never have pursued nuclear weapons the same way or on the same timeline. Either way, the combined manpower and resources could have produced one of the largest and most technologically advanced armed forces on Earth. With access to the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, and the Indian Ocean, this nation would occupy one of the most strategic positions on the planet. It would sit between the Middle East and Southeast Asia, controlling sea lanes that carry a significant share of global trade. That kind of location attracts influence, but it also attracts competition. China would almost certainly view a united British India as its biggest regional rival. The United States would likely see it as an essential strategic partner. Russia, Europe, and the Gulf states would all compete to strengthen ties with such a powerful country. Instead of being a regional power, this nation could become one of the key players shaping global politics. But here's the biggest irony. If partition had never happened, the wars fought between India and Pakistan over Kashmir specifically might never have existed. But that doesn't mean the underlying tensions would have vanished. The same religious and ethnic fault lines that led to partition in the first place would still have run straight through this united country. Instead of playing out as a conflict between two nations, they might have played out as unrest within one. No decades-long military rivalry between two separate states. No arms race between two neighboring nuclear powers. Instead of spending enormous resources competing with each other, those resources might have been invested in infrastructure, education, technology, and economic growth. That single change could have transformed the country's future, but none of this was guaranteed. A united British India had the potential to become one of the greatest success stories in modern history. It also had the potential to become one of its greatest failures, and that's what makes this question so difficult to answer. Because sometimes the countries with the greatest strengths also carry the greatest risks. So, would a united British India be a superpower today? The honest answer is probably, but not because of its size alone. It would be a superpower because of what that size could create. Nearly 2 billion people, one of the world's largest workforces, a booming technology sector, massive agricultural production, strategic ports connecting Europe, Africa, and Asia, and one of the fastest growing consumer markets on Earth. Very few countries could compete with that combination. Its economy could rival the United States and China. Its military would likely rank among the strongest in the world. Its voice in international organizations would be impossible to ignore. Every major global power would have to consider its interests before making decisions in Asia. But becoming a superpower isn't the same as becoming a successful country. Economic growth means little if political divisions become impossible to manage. History has shown that even wealthy nations can struggle when societies become deeply polarized. And a country as diverse as British India would constantly face that challenge. Would different regions demand greater autonomy? Would religious tensions eventually return? Could one government fairly represent nearly 2 billion people? No one can answer those questions with certainty. That's what makes alternate history so fascinating. It reminds us that history isn't inevitable. Small decisions can change the lives of billions. A border drawn on a map, a political compromise, a different election, or a different decision made in just a few weeks. Any one of those moments can completely reshape the future. Today, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh follow separate paths. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they compete, and sometimes their shared history still creates tensions nearly 80 years after partition. We'll never know what a united British India would have looked like. Maybe it would have become the world's greatest democracy. Maybe it would have become the next global superpower. Or maybe the very divisions that led to partition would eventually have torn it apart anyway. History gave us one version of events. But it's always worth asking, what if it had gone differently? Because sometimes the most interesting countries in history are the ones that never existed. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more geopolitical what-if scenarios from around the world. And until next time, thanks for watching.